Good morning, everyone. First of all, I just want to thank Garson and Shaw for inviting me here today, particularly to Catherine and Lisa. I'm originally from Georgia, so I, of course, jumped at the opportunity to speak at an event in Atlanta. But I'm also very interested in the secondhand textile industry. It's something that I wrote about in my book, Overdressed, and I really felt like I just scratched the surface, and it's an industry that I get asked a lot about. I travel a lot to speak about ethical clothing consumption, and people always want to know what the best way to dispose of clothing is. So just on a personal level, I'm very interested in getting to know all of you here and getting to know more about what you do. So just to give you a little bit of background on me, I am a working journalist. I have lived in New York for the last 12 years, and I'd never written about the fashion retail industry prior to writing Overdressed, the shockingly high cost of cheap fashion. I kind of identify myself as a typical American consumer, and in a way, a typical global clothing consumer, in that I shop or was shopping very cheap based on low price and whatever was trendy. So it was all about speed and low price. And it really got me curious about the way the global clothing industry works and how these multinational retailers are able to achieve the prices that they do, and how they've been able to rapidly accelerate the fashion production process. And it led me on a journey around the world, which I'm going to tell you just a little bit about today. So let's get started. It's really a great time to be a consumer when you think about it. 20 years ago, the average American family had maybe one television, and they would keep it until the thing wouldn't turn on anymore. Simply because the price of TVs were very high compared to today. But what we've seen over the last 20 years is the decline in the price of many types of consumer goods, including electronics like televisions, computers, of course, smartphones. But it extends into so many other things that we buy. Household goods, furniture. This is the inside of an IKEA store. IKEA is a Swedish furniture retailer. They're kind of known for very stylish, minimalist furniture, but also for their unbelievably low prices. I have a friend who just moved to a new apartment in Brooklyn, and he did what has become a rite of passage for young people in cities these days. He went to IKEA, and for $800, he furnished his entire apartment. But let's go back to the TV example for a second. Not only have we seen the decline of the price of consumer goods over the last 20 years, we've seen the acceleration of new features, new versions, new styles, new colors coming out faster and faster and faster. So today, what you've got is even poor American families, on average, have 2 TV sets. But what's more important to realize than that is that they're trading them in more quickly for newer versions. You're always seeing a thinner TV, higher definition. There's always a reason to go out and buy more. So across all kinds of consumer categories, we're seeing lower prices and a move towards disposable consumption. But nowhere is this more true than in the fashion industry. In fashion, we have seen the consumption of new styles go through the roof. And the acceleration of new styles is just moving faster and faster and faster year after year. And at the same time, the price of clothing continues to drop. In fact, we've been in a deflationary period in the fashion industry since the 80s. We've seen prices drop by almost 20%. And when you think about it, and you look at the world's most powerful and profitable and popular retailers today, clothing retailers today, they're the ones that are able to deliver the cheapest possible prices with the fastest speed in terms of innovation, inventory, and new styles. This is H&M, a Swedish retailer, clothing retailer. This is just a screen grab of their homepage from a couple of weeks ago. And as you'll see, the top that they're advertising is $9.95. And then they also have sweaters for $7.50. And H&M is one of the top 3 largest retailers in the world today. Again, these are prices we could not have imagined 20 years ago on a mainstream level. Forever 21 is an American retailer, very popular with teens and 20-somethings. Their prices are also equally astonishing. $8.80 for sandals, spring dresses for under $16. I mean, I remember, being a teenager. I would like to think that wasn't that long ago, but I had to save up to buy clothes. Today's teens are able to, for the price of a fast food meal, go out and replenish their closet with the latest styles. But the thing is, it's not just those 2 retailers that are operating that way. The entire mass market clothing industry is competing on low price and a constant churn of inventory. And it's not just American retailers. Like I mentioned, H&M is a Swedish retailer. There's also Zara, which is a Spanish retailer. And I know there are a lot of people from all over the world today, and you're probably thinking of the chains in your country that are popular, that operate this way. And what this system is called, this low-cost, high-speed system, it's known as fast fashion. Fast fashion is a rather innocent, kind of perfectly sounding phrase. I think it captures a lot. And on a very simplistic level, it just means that if you look at the way the retail industry ran, really as recently as 15 years ago, and there are still some retailers that run this way, they operated on a seasonal basis. So they would put out between 2 and 4 collections per year. And if you were a consumer, and I'm sure some of you remember shopping this way, I remember shopping this way, you go into the store at the beginning of the season, and if you like something, you come back a couple weeks or a couple months later, and you wait for it to go on sale, and then you buy it. So shopping was a much slower, more intentional process. The fast fashion calendar has just thrown that completely out the window. The fast fashion production model tries to get new inventory into stores every 2 to 6 weeks. A chain like Zara, which is a Spanish retailer, is one of the fastest in the industry. They're able to get new inventory into their stores every 2 weeks. So that gives consumers 26 reasons a year to go into their stores. And in fact, Zara customers do in fact shop in their stores on average 17 times a year. But I think that this little diagram is kind of misleading because, as everyone in this room knows, Fast fashion hasn't just spread our consumption of clothing out evenly across the year, taken the same volume of consumption and just, spread it out over the course of the year. It's escalated our consumption dramatically. So in 1991, we were consuming 34 items of clothing per year, and it's almost doubled 20 years later. Change, please. We're now consuming 62, and these are US figures, 62 garments and 7 pairs of shoes per year. Change. And change. But the thing about the fashion industry is you can no longer just think about American consumption. Americans have always been great consumers. We're great shoppers, and consumption has kind of been a cornerstone of the American economy going back to the post-war period. But today, the fashion industry is globalized. So you can't just look in isolation at American consumption. We have to start thinking about how American consumption is tied to consumption all around the world, as well as to production all around the world. Change. This is a very, very appropriate quote from the New York Times that describes the logic of the fast fashion system. In Zara, every purchase is an impulse buy. There's no longer any saving up for that gorgeous leather jacket in the window. You are buying clothes not because you love them, but because at $50, and that's actually very expensive for most clothes today, those hot pants are as cheap as Sunday brunch for 2 and likely to be gone in a matter of days. I think to me that really summarizes the disposable mindset of the fast fashion consumer. Change, please. Yesterday, I was down in Griffin, Georgia. I have family there, and I was interviewing somebody who works at 1888 Mills, which is one of the only remaining textile mills in the United States. And they produce towels, and they actually are making them for Walmart now. But 1888 is really an exception. This photograph was taken where a textile mill had stood in Griffin since the late 1800s. It's one of a half a dozen textile mills that have been torn down in the city as the textile industry has been offshored from the United States. Change, please. This is another textile mill in Greenville. It's outside of Greenville, South Carolina. And of course, there are thousands of buildings like this all over the United States. Change. And the apparel and textile industries have been one of the top 10 job-losing industries of the last decade. And the job letting is projected to continue over the next 10 years as well. And one could argue, okay, that's just progress. Society is all about creative destruction. One industry dies, but we gain another industry. But as anyone who lives in America know, we are suffering through a jobless recovery, and the jobs that we have regained are lower paying and lower skilled than manufacturing jobs. So as a society, as a nation, we have a challenge to retain manufacturing jobs in this country and to improve the quality of jobs that are here. So all these issues are very tied together. Change, please. But it's really not surprising when you think about it and you look at wages between the United States and these countries that the fashion industry has moved into. The difference in wages is dramatic. This is the average hourly garment worker wages in the United States, $10.58. And these are some of the other top garment exporting countries in the world today. So China is $1.26, all the way down to Bangladesh, which is actually the lowest in terms of wages in the world. So it's really not surprising that this industry has been outsourced. And I think that one of the misconceptions about it is that the apparel industry is just going to move into all of these developing countries, and it'll be a great opportunity for economies to develop, and it's just a great pathway out of poverty. But through my research, what I learned is that development as a result of the textile and apparel industry moving into a country is very uneven. There are winners and there are losers. I think in our country right now, we're an example of a loser. Change, please. China is definitely an example of a winner, and I'm not China bashing. I'm going to explain what I mean by this. I went to southern China in 2011. I went to Shenzhen, which is the city right across from Hong Kong. And Shenzhen didn't exist 30 years ago, and now it is a booming, extremely wealthy metropolitan area of over 10 million people. And that city was built from the wealth of Chinese manufacturing. And now that China has emerged, the economy has emerged, what we're seeing is a consumer class, which is fantastic, and we're also seeing workers advocating for better wages and more social benefits. So Chinese workers, even in the apparel and textile industries, are moving up the ladder. Next, please. And the other interesting thing I saw in China was that despite the stereotypes, Chinese factories are very modern, they're very clean, they have, top-of-the-line, state-of-the-art technology. And again, there was evidence everywhere of China moving ahead. Next, please. Next. So what happens in the fast fashion system when workers in one country start demanding too much pay, too many benefits? Major retailers start looking for somewhere else to move. They moved out of the United States. They moved into Mexico in the 90s. They moved into China in the 2000s, China and Southeast Asia. And now they're moving into Bangladesh. And this is a photograph I took in Bangladesh in 2011, and I like it just because you can really see the contrast between the photo I showed you of Shenzhen, which that was a picture of construction of what will be Shenzhen's Central Park. So that's the level of development that's happening in China, in southern China. And then you go to a place like Bangladesh, which is an extremely poor developing country. The infrastructure is horrible. I mean, imagine doing business, if you're, working in textiles and doing business in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, and trying to deliver an order, and the roads look like this. And obviously there are paved roads in the capital, but this is a very typical scene on the side streets. And the other thing is that Bangladesh really became notorious about a year ago because a factory collapsed in the capital and killed, it was a garment factory, and it killed over 1,130 people. Change, please. And this is inside of a textile mill north of Dhaka. And again, you can see just the dramatic difference in the modernity and the technology used between the industry in Bangladesh and the industry in China. Next, please. And this is inside a Umbro factory, which is a subsidiary of Nike. And this would be an example of a garment factory in Bangladesh that's, kind of top of the line, state of the art, up to code. Next. And this is also a photograph I took inside the Umbro factory. Next, please. But as I was saying, earlier. The issue right now with the globalized fashion industry, and the fast fashion industry in particular, is that we have very, very rich multinational companies going into poor countries, and the wealth is not being spread around. If you go back to the way the textile industry developed in the United States, to a certain degree, it offered a generation of people the opportunity to move into the middle class in the United States. And that's what we really need to be seeing in other countries around the world where these industries are developing. But in fact, there are too many losers right now in the global textile and apparel industry. While Chinese workers are moving up the ladder, there are other examples around the world of countries where wages and the cost of living are getting further and further apart. So apparel workers are actually getting poorer. And I find that deeply unethical when you think about the fact that the companies that are going in and placing orders are, again, these very huge multinational companies. Next, please. This is a photograph of Rana Plaza. So this is the factory in Bangladesh that collapsed a little over a year ago. And again, over 1,100 workers died and thousands more were injured. Next, please. And this is a list of the brands, the huge brands that manufactured in this factory. And again, what we're really trying to work towards right now in the fashion industry is more responsibility down the supply chain and passing the wealth down the supply chain so things like this don't happen going forward. Next. I know Matthias is going to talk more about the environmental impact of the global fashion industry, but I do want to say, this is a photo from China. I didn't take it, but I love this picture. It reminds me that, you know, in China there's a saying that you can always tell what color is going to be in style because that's the color that the rivers run in China. So this is another reason why clothes are cheap today, is because we've externalized the environmental impact of what we're wearing. When the textile industry was in the United States, it eventually got to a place where there were very tight environmental regulations. And in fact, if you talk to anyone who still works in textile production in the United States, you can usually get them to grumble about it, about how strict the environmental standards are in the United States, because their competition in places like China and Brazil, and even in Bangladesh, where there are a lot of leather tanneries, their competition is not really using any environmental standards or not being held to them. And, you know, besides the bottom line, this is not a sustainable way to run a global apparel industry. It's not only is it affecting the drinking water in places like China, it's affecting the health of the workers that come into contact with you know, dyes and toxic finishes in textile houses, but it also affects consumers in the developed world and in the Western world because the toxins that are being used in textile dyes on the other side of the world end up in the products that we buy. So all these issues are tied together. Next, please. I'll let you guys read through some of that. Water pollution is definitely a big issue for the fashion industry right now. And really, the issue is one of scale. The fashion industry continues to grow year after year. You know, figures place it at over a $1 trillion global industry. And even if you look at China, where, you know, at one point in the 2000s, there were 15 million people working in the apparel and textile industry. And in Bangladesh, you have 4 to 5 million people working in the industry. So it's just vast. And so, again, to compare it to when it was in the United States, where everything was very small scale and the impacts were local, now the impacts impacts have been spread all around the world, and that's really where the damage is happening. It's all about scale. Next, please. So, just to get a sense of the increasing amount of consumption, I really find this statistic harrowing. This is from Lucy Siegel's wonderful book, To Die For. Fiber usage has gone from 10 million tons globally to 82 million tons. And that takes a tremendous amount of energy and resources to produce. Next. And the fast fashion system isn't done. They have plans for really total world domination. If you look at where they're expanding in China right now, which is the new market, as I was saying, China is developing a consumer class, and that's the next frontier for fast fashion, is getting those 1.3 billion consumers to shop like Americans do, and to shop like the Brits do, and to shop like Western European consumers do. So H&M, who already have 3,000 locations around the world, are planning 80 more in China alone just this year. Zara is planning 50 in China. Uniqlo, which is a Japanese fast fashion company, is planning 305 new stores in China. And if you've never seen a Uniqlo, you will see one soon, because they are trying to be the world's largest retailer by 2020. And they're on track to do so if they continue to grow at the rate that they're growing at. And not ironically, but they're owned by a company called Fast Retailing. So they're very open about the fact that they run on the fast fashion model. Unapologetic, I guess. And then other American retailers are moving into China as well, Abercrombie and Fitch and Walmart among them. Next, please. One thing that I really want to hit home, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, is that the fast fashion cycle isn't really a cycle. It's a linear system. It's all about producing new product, making it obsolete as fast as possible, forcing consumers to stop using it and return to the store to buy more. And that's where, of course, your industry comes in. But you know, we live on a planet of it's over 7.1 billion people now. And as everyone in this room knows, this is simply not a sustainable way to run the global apparel industry. We can't continue to produce new product with no plan for the full life cycle of that product. And that's the method that most mass market retailers are running on today. Next, please. I know those figures are kind of hard to see, but this is what really blows my mind. When you look at the amount of clothing that fast fashion stores are producing today, it is just staggering. On average, they're producing well over 1 million pieces of clothing per day. Zara produces 450 million items of clothing a year. Uniqlo, 600 million, and H&M, 550 million. And these are all products being produced without thought as to what's going to happen when the consumer is finished with them. Are we going to upcycle them? Are we going to make them into new collections? How can we reduce the impact of those numbers? Next, please. And I'm going to leave you on this slide and take questions after that. But that's really, to me, the challenge of the global fashion industry and fast fashion as a system. We're not talking about a small cottage industry in the United States anymore. Fashion is spread all around the world, and I think it's a microcosm for all of the problems that we face as global citizens. It touches on issues of sustainability and the health and safety and progress of workers all around the world. And as many problems as the global fashion industry has created, I think it's also created a lot of opportunities. And I believe that it's going to take a lot of human ingenuity, and I'm glad I'm in a room with people who agree with me, to come together and to start to solve some of these problems. Thank you. Should we take some questions? Yes, sir.
My question is to all of us, would it be possible, or should we, as all that we are to use clothing, should we take the initiative to start educating people not to be so wasteful we are?
Well, I think that, you know, does someone else want to respond to that? I mean, I think so. I go around, as I said, I travel all the time and talk to consumers, and I think there's a lot of confusion about what the appropriate thing is to do with an item of clothing when you don't want it anymore. There's a lot of confusion about the charity system. You know, I'm sure everyone in here knows that a lot of consumers, when they find out that clothing is being resold for profit, I think there's confusion about it. It freaks people out, and they say, well, maybe I should just throw the clothing away because I don't know if I want to support that charity, or I don't know if I want my clothing being resold for money, being resold. I feel like there needs to be more understanding that right now we're consuming at such a high level that this industry is doing consumers a huge service by taking their used goods and finding a home for them, their unwanted goods. So I think that there is a branding or messaging lapse there that needs to be resolved.
How has your research changed your personal consumption habits?
Oh, sure. So the gentleman asked how my research has changed my personal consumption habits. That's a great question. I hear that one often. Well, maybe I can talk through what I'm wearing as an example. I try to buy American made when possible, but I also I'm not fearful of the global fashion industry. I would rather factories in places like Bangladesh and China become ethical places to buy clothing from, rather than just be closed-minded and, singularly nationalistic or something about where I buy clothes. I buy a lot of vintage and secondhand. This is an upcycled silk shirt from I think I got it at a Salvation Army and resewed it myself. This is American made. My jeans are Eileen Fisher, and I love that company because they're an example of a company that has a very sustainable message. They also source from China and United States, and they've just they just have a commitment to being transparent to their consumer and also offering a product that's eco-friendly. And then my boots are thrifted. And really, mainly, I just buy a lot less, Like, when I think back to before I wrote the book, I owned 354 items of clothing, and I was, like, always buying new stuff. So I think it's really, it's been more of a shift in thinking, Like, just being intentional and buying things that I really like and I know I'm going to wear. So on that level, a lot of times when I travel and speak to people, I say it doesn't matter where you shop or what price point. I'm not trying to get people to buy expensive clothing. It's just to get out of that disposable mindset and realize that your clothing does have an impact, and to think about that when you purchase it. What is that? Oh, right. So Georgian. Can you say that again? The countries that.
Like we talked about, how went from China now to Bangladesh.
Yeah.
Where are the raw materials to make those clothing? Where does that come
Where do the textiles come from, or where does the going back all the way to the cotton and polyester?
from? Oh, cotton and polyester.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So the textile industry and the fiber industry, repeat the question, right? Okay, so the gentleman was asking for, what I understood to be your question was where is the fiber and where the textiles being produced, and is that happening in the same country as the garment manufacturing? Yes and no. I mean, China has a huge textile industry. What's interesting to me about China is they create clusters where the entire supply chain is in one area. So in Dongguan in southern China, you have access to cotton, polyester. China has put huge investments into polyester and all kinds of plastics in the last 10 to 15 years. So that supply chain is matured, and because textiles are more automated and technology intensive, they're not quite as sensitive to price. That's one of the reasons why the textile industry in the States held on a little bit longer than the garment manufacturing industry, because it is highly automated. The United States is still one of the largest producers of cotton, or is it the largest? India. Other countries with big textile industries are Brazil and India. Yeah, I don't know quite as much about the textile industry, but it's just as globalized as the garment producing part of the industry. Right. Yeah. Okay, that's a good question. So she asked the $7.50 sweater that was in the H&M ad, what would be the cost to the retailer? So how much is the markup? Fast fashion, as far as I know, takes a traditional retail markup of 2.5 times over the cost, the hard cost of the product. Which is crazy to think that it was whatever that would be, $3 to produce. But the way that they make a profit, which I should have mentioned this in my presentation, is it's volume. They don't put things on sale as much. They offer their product at the lowest possible price, and because they've hooked people into consuming so often, there are always people in a Zara, always people in an H&M, always people in Kohl's or JCPenney or Forever 21 or whatever store we're talking about. So they don't have to mark things down the way that retailers used to have to do going back like 10 or 15 years. So they offer the clothes at the lowest possible price and then just move them out the door and make their profit off volume. So if you're moving 450 million items per year, then you make your profit up over the course of that scale. If that makes sense.
Is there a gender discrepancy in the amount of consumption that we're getting? I mean, when I go into a department store, I notice the women's section is much larger than the men's section. The fashion forever also seems to be a lot larger too.
So the question was, is there a gender discrepancy in the acceleration of fashion consumption? Yes. I think that the fast fashion retailers, there should be better statistics out there on that, but I think the fast fashion retailers are trying to ensnare men into that cycle as well. I hear from a lot of men that the quality of men's clothing is going down as well. It used to be that men's clothing was better made just because men's clothing is less fashion sensitive. You know, it's like suits, certain cuts of men's workwear. It's kind of kind of static. But I think that that's changing as well. It's certainly not as quickly as the women's industry, but I think that's the plan. I think there was someone back there. Yeah. Hang on, I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Okay. Her question is, are there other countries that reuse and recycle at the level that the United States does, or if they do it better? So I feel like there's a room full of people who can answer that better than I can. I would hope so. There's got to be someone that does it. I think Steve will probably talk about that a little bit more. As far as I know, the conversation about sustainability in fashion is in the UK is far ahead of where we're at. Germany. Other examples? Scandinavia, Canada, I would say too. Yeah, I think the U.S. is pretty far behind. Any other questions? Right. Uh-huh. Okay, so there was a follow-up question about the retail price of clothing. So if you see a sweater for $100, does that mean that it was still just $3.50 to make, and there's just markup, or are you just paying for the label? That's a really good question. It's not an easy one to answer because in some cases that $100 sweater is a reflection of the costs, and sometimes it's not. I would say more often it's not. You're paying for the brand name. If you look at the label on clothes and that sweater says it's made in Bangladesh, that means the cost to produce it were very low. But then the other factor is the materials that are going into that sweater. If it's acrylic, that means the material was the material costs were very low. But let's say it's cashmere or wool, then the costs are going to be higher. So those are really the two factors: is the materials used and the country of origin. So I mean, like clothes made in the United States still are quite a bit more expensive than clothes that come from somewhere like Bangladesh. And then the third part of that is the quality. The ethical brands that are coming out now that would have maybe a $100 price point for a sweater, I think that there is a difference in the craftsmanship. So you're not just paying $100 because something is made ethically. There's actually a qualitative difference in the product you're buying. And hopefully we'll move back to that model. Whereas now I think there's a lot of skepticism when people go out and shop because they know that oftentimes that $100 sweater is a ripoff.
If you were going to take your presentation, if you had any interest in making a movie out of it or a PBS documentary or anything like that?
So he wanted to know if I have any intentions of making a documentary about my work. I have thought about it. There are actually a number of people working on movies in this field that I think will come out in the next couple of years. One of them is called The True Cost. There's one called The River Blue, which is about the environmental degradation of the textile industry in China. I also have a friend in New York who's working on a documentary about workers in Bangladesh. So I feel kind of fortunate that there are so many people in the last couple of years who've come into this space and who are working on the same issues and the same kind of activism that I am. So if I don't have the energy or time to make a documentary, someone else will. But yeah, I guess maybe is my answer. Any other questions? How are we doing on time? Okay. So we have time for a couple more questions if anybody has anything else they want to bring up.
The question is, how do you counteract that?
Right.
What do we do to slow down? How do we slow down the process?
Okay, so the question is, how do we counteract fast fashion and slow down the process, which is the $1,000,000 question. Because in some ways it just feels like it's always running out in front of us. It's always a step ahead. You know, as I said, it's expanding into China, expanding into new markets. I think in the last couple of years, we've seen the tide turn. And I think the factory collapse in Bangladesh was also a watershed moment in the minds of consumers. I think that we're kind of in the middle of what I like to think of as fast fashion fatigue. A lot of consumers, and maybe it was set off by the recession, but I'm hearing a lot of consumers say they're getting kind of sick of buying something and having it fall apart or go out of style. You know, like it was fun for a while. We kind of went on our 10-year-long shopping spree, and then it got old. You know, most women I know, their closets are so jam-packed with clothes, you can't even find something to wear. You know, it's ironic, but it's the clutter is overwhelming. So I think that there has been a turning point in the mindset of the consumer. So that's great. That's a huge hurdle. The second component is these fast fashion companies aren't going to go away. So while I think it's great that we have an ethical fashion movement growing and all these great small independent brands, people who are doing upcycling and recycling, we also have to get the fast fashion companies working on their sustainability, working on their human rights records. And H&M of the whole bunch has probably made the biggest strides in terms of trying to be a little bit more sustainable. They offer a conscious collection, which is made out of upcycled and recycled materials. And it's very controversial though, because like as I said, how can a company that produces 500 million garments per year ever be considered sustainable? One thing that I'm curious about, and I wrote about this in my book, is what's going to happen to clothing as prices in China skyrocket? Because in a sense, you can't really replace Chinese manufacturing prowess. As I said, at one point they had 15 million garment workers. As those garment workers decide that they're going to go to university instead or get a job in an office, you can move the industry around to a certain extent, but you can't recreate what happened there. So we may, in the next several years, the next 5 to 10 years, see the price of clothing go back up, and I think that would be the best thing that could happen to this industry, to be honest. You know, I don't think anyone wants to see clothes get prohibitively expensive. But if they were less cheap, it would slow down the pace of consumption tremendously and give all the players in this space the opportunity to get a handle on all these issues that we're talking about. Anybody else? All right, so should we leave it there? Okay, I'll hand the mic over to Lisa. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and for listening.